The way he left his phone face down on the kitchen counter nagged at me. Never did that before, always tossed it on the island screen up, like he had nothing to hide. But lately, it's always been this new habit, face down, the glow of notifications hidden. Not that I cared much before. Dinner wasn't any better. Usually, Mark regales me with tales from the office, juicy gossip about that annoying Karen in HR, you know the type. Tonight it was flat. Answers in single words, his eyes barely met mine. The whole time I felt this distance between us, like a canyon was opening up on our kitchen table. Then, the late nights started. Big project, gonna be a game changer, was all he'd say, heading for the door. Twice, no, 3 times now, I swore I caught a whiff of something sweet, almost floral, hanging in the air behind him. Perfume, not mine. Sleep was an enemy those nights. My mind raced. Was I crazy? Maybe Mark was just stressed, and I was letting my imagination run wild. But deep down, I felt it, something was off. Something was changing. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. When he was dead asleep, I crept over, heart pounding. His phone lay on the nightstand, the screen dark. It was stupid, I knew it was. But I reached out, my hands shaking. I unlocked it, fingers flying over the familiar password. Messages, dozens of them, all work-related, nothing suspicious. Disappointment washed over me. I was an idiot. As I put the phone back, something flickered in the inbox. Just a name, one I didn't recognize. Curiosity burned through me. I clicked it. The messages weren't raunchy, nothing like that. It was just friendly. Way too friendly for coworkers. Jokes, memes, heart emojis. My stomach sank. That night, when he tried to touch me, I turned away, my skin crawling. The passion we had, it was gone. Replaced by a cold, sick feeling deep in my bones. The next day, that damn phone haunted me. I should have just left it alone, moved on. But I couldn't. All I could think about was that name in his inbox. During my lunch break, I found myself scrolling through company directories, searching faces. Nothing. Then, a stupid thought struck me. The other night, Mark mentioned a new steakhouse downtown. Fancy place, supposed to be some big client deal thing. I knew he was lying then. Why would he waste company money on lunch? My hands were clammy as I scoured the restaurant's website. There it was. A lunch menu, and tucked away at the bottom, a receipt form. I plugged in yesterday's date. My pulse throbbed in my temples as the receipt popped up. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine. Definitely not a business meeting. Fear and anger twisted in my gut, making me feel sick. After work, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove downtown and parked a few blocks from his office building. It felt like some bad spy movie, me staking him out on the street. When he finally emerged, he wasn't alone. A woman, young, ridiculously pretty, all long legs and shiny hair, fell into step beside him. My stomach plummeted. They laughed at something. His hand touched her arm lightly. I watched from my car, a knot of ice in my chest. He opened the passenger door for her, and they drove off, disappearing into the flow of traffic. I forced myself to follow, just far enough to see where they went. Another restaurant, this one small and tucked away on a side street. He's an idiot, I thought bitterly. Doesn't even try to be discreet. I needed to know who she was. Needed proof. Mark and I had a wide social circle. There was bound to be someone who knew something. That's how I found myself at lunch with Sarah, a chatty woman from the neighborhood whose husband worked in the same industry as Mark. It took a few glasses of wine, but finally, Sarah let a name slip, Emily. Little Emily from finance, right? She's a sweetheart, but always thought, well, maybe Mark sees something in her we all missed. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what she'd said. I got home that night feeling numb. Emily. Of course, it was someone young, someone to make him feel important. I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, looking at my reflection. Was I suddenly old? Unappealing? I didn't want to cry, didn't want to fall apart. Instead, a cold determination settled over me. Confronting Mark then would be pointless. He'd deny it, I'd rant, we'd both feel awful, and nothing would change. There had to be another way. The second I confronted Mark, everything changed. He was all apologies, swore it was a meaningless fling, that only I mattered. He even looked a little scared, funny, now that he thought he had something to lose. Part of me wanted to believe him, to cling to the familiar. But Emily's face kept flashing in my mind, her easy laugh, the way she touched his arm. No, this was a game now, and I wasn't going to lose. "I forgive you," I told him that night, and meant the opposite of every word. He looked so relieved, the idiot. That's when I knew I had to get smart. This wasn't about screaming matches, it was about winning. He tried to get back to normal, being attentive, suggesting weekend getaways like he used to. I played along, all smiles and sweet words. But behind the act, I was busy. That misplaced anniversary card reappearing on his desk? That was me, seeing Emily, looking surprised and awkward, at Mark's favorite coffee shop? Also me, subtle things he'd brush off as coincidence, but enough to keep him on edge. He never knew what to expect, started looking over his shoulder. Outwardly, my life was the same, dinners with friends, volunteering, the usual. But in my head, it was all fury and careful calculation. Every laugh over cocktails with our old crowd was agony, knowing they saw us as the perfect couple. The anger inside me, it was like this hot, writhing thing, barely contained. Then there was the day at the grocery store. I was lost in thought, lining up a perfect revenge scenario, when suddenly I met his eyes. A stranger, tall, kind face. Something about him, some understanding in his gaze, disarmed me. I felt my cheeks go hot, and looked away as fast as I could. It was just a dumb moment, a blip in my master plan. But that night, it haunted me. Had he seen through my mask of composure? A week later, I found myself at the office of a lawyer friend recommended. Her office was all sharp angles and cold steel. Perfect. With a clinical detachment that surprised even me, I laid it all out, the cheating, my plan for retribution. Every word tasted bitter, but also strangely satisfying. The lawyer was impressed, or maybe horrified. Doesn't matter which. She laid out my options, all the ways I could make Mark's world crumble around him. We talked numbers, cold, precise figures representing everything we built together. My mind raced, but my face, I'm sure, was still that same calm mask. Our anniversary was coming up. Perfect. That night I went all out. Fancy restaurant reservation, a sappy card, all the things he loved. Meanwhile, I'd rented a tiny, nondescript apartment across town, my temporary HQ. The day of work was a blur. My getaway bag was stashed in my trunk, a burner phone in my pocket. Every time Mark smiled at me, wanting to make up for lost time, I felt a jolt of twisted satisfaction. He was clueless, the fool. After dinner, I pretended a headache. Needed an early night. He kissed me, oblivious. I watched him leave, listened for the front door closing behind him. That was it, the switch flipped. It wasn't my home anymore, just a battlefield I was leaving behind. With practiced efficiency, I went about my tasks. Bank transfers, moving jewelry, important documents, everything I needed to vanish. Then, the letter. It took hours. Not a love letter turned sour, no tear-stained accusations. It was a precise dismantling of everything he thought was true about his life, typed in crisp, emotionless font. Leaving it on his pillow was brutal, but necessary. Then, the hardest part. A carefully plotted errand took me past his favorite wine bar. Sure enough, there they were, Mark and Emily, heads together, laughing. It was so blatant, so careless. I parked across the street, willing myself invisible. He deserved this. A taste of public exposure, a tiny fracture in his perfect deception. I stayed long enough to see her face turn white when she spotted me. Then I walked back to my car and drove away. Hours later, back in the desolate apartment, his calls bombarded my phone. Finally, he left one voicemail, voice thick with fury. What the hell was that? You think you can just... What game are you playing? Game? Almost cute. I deleted the message, turned off the phone, and poured myself a generous glass of wine. It tasted like victory. Sleep, when it came, wasn't peaceful, but it didn't matter. Tomorrow, the real war began. The aftermath happened so fast it was almost comical. The day after I vanished, he bombarded my lawyer friend with frantic calls, trying to find me. Too late. My accounts? Emptied. Investments? Liquidated. He was left panicking, realizing every bit of financial security he thought he had was gone. Meanwhile, little Emily disappeared. Turns out, a fling is one thing, being tied to a public mess is quite another. She packed her bags, left town, smart girl. Mark was alone, truly alone now. The gossip spread like wildfire. The wife he wronged? Turns out she wasn't as meek as everyone thought. People who were all sugar and smiles to my face before, well, let's just say their tune changed. Dinners, events, those invites dried up overnight. Mark, the golden boy, was suddenly tainted. At work, that big project fell apart. No focus, no trust. I heard through the grapevine he got called on the carpet, then sidelined. All those late nights wasted, and for what? Every time I imagined his face, the confusion turning to despair, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Then, he tried to reach out to me. Pathetic messages, begging, to talk, to work things out. Then the threats. My lawyer handled that mess. Each time his ranting got worse, she sent a meticulously written warning, a promise that every action had consequences. That's what broke him, I think, more than the money. Control, he craved it, and now a woman he dismissed had all the power. He spiraled. There were rumors, angry outbursts in public, even a drunken scene at a bar where we used to go. He blamed me for everything, said I destroyed him on purpose. In a way, I suppose I did. The best part? I didn't have to lift a finger for that public meltdown. People love a salacious scandal, and once suspicion got planted, they dug up the rest. Old photos, sightings, whispers turned into outright accusations. His reputation was in tatters. When his lawyer finally served me with divorce papers, my response wasn't rage, or even sadness. It was a settlement proposal so ruthless it probably made the lawyer wince. Bankruptcy wasn't enough. I wasn't just taking what was mine, I was taking everything. Watching Mark completely fall apart was a chilling sort of satisfaction. After the initial fury, I mostly felt nothing much. He wasn't worth my anger anymore, just a pathetic figure I barely recognized. The news filtered back to me in bits and pieces. Turns out alcohol was his new best friend. The meticulous man who only sipped vintage wine was now spotted stumbling out of dive bars in the middle of the day. His appearance went downhill fast. Wrinkled clothes, unshaven, that smug confidence replaced by a hunched posture and haunted eyes. Some people might have pitied him. Not me. Every hollowed-out feature was a testament to his downfall. Worse than his decline was the paranoia that ate away at him. He started seeing enemies everywhere, convinced people were whispering, laughing behind his back. He wasn't wrong. This small, comfortable world we lived in? Turns out, they loved witnessing the mighty fall. The work gossip was the most delicious. Outbursts, missed deadlines, screaming matches with colleagues who suddenly weren't afraid of him anymore. It all built up to the inevitable, him getting fired. That big project of his turned out to be a total disaster, costing the company money. He'd built his entire identity on his career, and now that was gone too. I heard he tried to track down Emily, probably in a drunken haze. Stupid man. By then, she was miles away, some anonymous city, a new life where no one knew her as the homewrecker. Serves him right, being abandoned like that. He needed someone to cling to, someone to blame. I wasn't playing that role anymore. I moved into my new apartment around then. Not some lavish place, but it was mine, chosen on my own terms. Each new piece of furniture, every plant I placed on the windowsill, it felt like a tiny act of rebellion. My prison sentence was over. His, well, that was his own doing. Finalizing the divorce was clinical, a gruesome kind of formality. My lawyer was a shark, and Marx was reeling from everything else imploding. There weren't tearful negotiations, just acid spreadsheets and cold signatures. I got more than I originally asked for, leaving him scrambling to cover basic living expenses. My final act of revenge? Refusing alimony. Let him work for his own money, for once. Word of the settlement spread fast, another juicy morsel for the gossip mill. I wasn't cruel, not really, but hearing through mutual friends about his humiliation. Well, I won't lie, it felt good. Then came a touch of revenge that was even sweeter. Turns out, Mark had a rival at work, an underling who always got overlooked. I made a few anonymous calls, slipped a bit of information to the right person, and voila. That underling got Mark's old job. Knowing every promotion would feel like a slap in the face to Mark? That made me positively gleeful. With more money than I ever imagined, I did something radical, invested a huge chunk in a startup venture, something risky and thrilling. Not just for profit, but for the feeling of building something, making my own mark instead of being defined by a failed marriage. Life took on this strange rhythm. There were lonely nights, sure, echoes of the past haunting me sometimes. But then I'd see a grocery store display and remember the man from ages ago, the one whose eyes seemed to understand when mine were filled with despair. I decided to track him down. Just coffee, just a conversation. Turned out he remembered me too. Kindness, then, was more powerful than I thought. He became a constant, a quiet source of support, and then, something more. It felt terrifying to trust again. but I was learning that risks could pay off in unexpected ways. The day I moved into my new place, that's when I felt the shift was complete. Spacious, filled with light, chosen entirely by me. Every piece. The plush rugs, artwork that spoke to my soul, a bookshelf I filled with novels I'd always meant to read. It was a declaration of independence. No more hiding, no more compromises. Mark. He was becoming a ghost, a cautionary tale I'd tell myself to never fall victim again. Years went by, not in a blur, but each one deliberately taken and owned. My business investment paid off. That gamble turned into a success story, and I was smart, managing money in a way I never could before. With the new man, David, kind and solid, things progressed slowly. Love took on a whole new meaning, built on trust earned, not promises made. Then, like a pebble tossed into a still pond, news of Mark ripped through my carefully constructed life. Rehab. Turns out, self-pity and cheap whiskey are a dangerous combination. He'd hit rock bottom, lost everything. For one jagged moment, I felt the old rage flare. Part of me wanted him to suffer forever. Then I pictured him, bloated, defeated, a shell of the arrogant man he once was. The image wasn't satisfying, just sad. I toyed with sending a donation to that rehab place, anonymously of course. Make him sweat, wondering where it came from. Then I realized, he wouldn't even connect it to me. My success was invisible to him, because that world, our world, didn't exist anymore. Not caring what happened to him. That felt far more powerful than any petty revenge. News came a year or so later that he'd left rehab. Nobody knew where he went. Some said another city, others figured he was homeless, living on the streets. His name popped up occasionally, always in whispers laced with disgust or morbid fascination. He was a ghost story now, a warning passed among couples at parties. The invitation to that charity gala landed on my desk a few months later. One of those fancy, black tie events, the kind Mark and I used to attend, all smiles and lies. Should I go? Some act of defiance? That felt too dramatic. In the end, I went because the charity supported a cause I actually believed in. I arrived alone, head held high. A dramatic dress, a risky color. I hadn't cared what people thought in a long time, but that night, dressing the part felt good. Heads turned, but not with pity or judgment. There was curiosity, maybe even admiration. I'd become the woman who survived, who came back stronger. That night, I made a sizable donation to the charity, public, in my name. Not some petty dig at Mark, but a way of taking all that pain and transforming it into power. Later, I even danced with David, laughing until tears ran down my face. It felt like a baptism, a letting go of the last bit of anger I held onto. The next day, I established a foundation in my name. It supports women like I was back then, trapped, scared, unsure how to escape. Thinking of everything Mark took from me, and channeling that into something good? Now, that's the ultimate revenge. The wedding was small, beautiful. Just David, a few of my closest friends, a judge by the ocean. Nothing like the extravagant affair Mark and I endured, filled with people I barely knew. This time, every vow felt true, earned through heartbreak and finding the courage to believe in love again. Life settled into a content rhythm. My foundation thrived, real success stories unfolding with every woman who found the strength to leave a toxic life behind. David and I built a comfortable, happy life, quiet evenings, shared passions, the kind of easy companionship I never dreamt possible. Then again, I never used to dream much at all. That was one of Mark's gifts, I suppose, crushing my hopes so utterly, that freedom became its own kind of ambition. Sometimes, my mind would still flicker back to him. Not with sadness, or even anger, just a cold recognition of all he lost. I knew he was nothing, meant nothing, and that emptiness felt like a victory hard won. The encounter happened at of all places, the supermarket. A woman I vaguely recognized from the old neighborhood approached me, eyes filled with hesitant sympathy. Turns out, even small-town gossip has a long reach. I heard about Mark, she said quietly, such a shame, really. He was always nice enough. The urge to laugh, vicious and loud, bubbled up in my throat. Nice enough? That was a new one. Instead, I managed a small, almost sad smile. Don't be, I replied, the words feeling almost rehearsed. Everything that happened to him, he brought upon himself. A look of startled uncertainty flitted across her face, pity battling with curiosity. Good. Let her wonder, let the story twist and morph without ever knowing the truth. I walked away before she could offer another vapid platitude. He wasn't a tragedy, not a victim. Just a man who destroyed himself, piece by piece. I ran into David at the checkout line, his arms loaded with ingredients for some new recipe he was excited about. As we walked out, sunshine warm on my face, he slipped his hand into mine. It was a simple gesture, unremarkable, yet it filled me with a sense of peace that was deeper than joy. My life wasn't about revenge anymore, or proving those old gossips wrong. It was about every day that was mine to shape, a testament to the woman I chose to become. The past was truly a foreign country now, one I didn't regret leaving